Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. I never had a fear of cemeteries growing up. I'd visit my grandfather's grave with my mother, helping her clean the headstone, lighting candles, even attending memorial services in the pouring rain. I always saw it as part of life, especially here in rural Montana, where we still hold wakes at home and serve coffee and sandwiches to those who come to pay their last respects. But what happened at my Aunt Louise's wake about 3 years ago was the first time I witnessed death and fear walking hand in hand. We're from a small town near Billings, one of those places where everyone knows everyone. It was there I first heard talk of the old woman who blesses the dead. My uncle, who worked as a gravedigger, had mentioned her before, but always in that tone of someone just sharing old folklore. I laughed it off, thought it was just stories to scare children, until she appeared that day. The wake for my aunt was happening the way it always did around here, body laid out in the living room, covered with a white sheet edged with lace, candles in each corner, people arriving in their work boots, coffee brewing on the wood stove, children running around the yard. We lived far from town, so sometimes we couldn't get the body to the cemetery the same day. Sometimes we'd keep vigil at home, staying awake all night with the deceased in the living room, burying them the next day. Everyone was their neighbors, cousins, people from the community. The lights flickered now and then, but nobody paid much attention. Normal for a stormy day. But there was one detail that bothered me. The street dogs that always barked at everything didn't make a sound all night. Not when the hearse arrived. Not when one of the kids knocked over a chair with a crash. The worst part was around 4 a.m. when this strange wind picked up, a wind that seemed to come from nowhere. No windows were open. The candle near my aunt's head went out by itself. My uncle, who was standing next to me, just whispered quietly, "She's here." The most bizarre thing was that nobody saw her enter. I swear, nobody saw a door opening, nobody saw her coming from the yard, nothing. When the candle went out, we looked toward the casket, and she was already there, standing with her back to us. She wore a black dress that reached the floor, seeming stained with melted wax, with a veil covering her face. But what struck me most were her feet, swollen, purple at the tips of the toes, and bare. They looked like feet that had already been buried. She didn't speak, just stood there. And nobody, absolutely nobody, asked who she was. The strange thing was that everyone seemed to accept her being there, as if she were family, as if it wasn't unusual at all. One of my mother's cousins even made room for her to approach the body, simply saying, "Would you like to bless the deceased?" The old woman nodded her head very slowly. It all seemed normal, but my uncle turned white immediately. He grabbed my arm and whispered in my ear, "It's her. The woman with the feet." I didn't understand at first. I only remembered later what he had told me before, and I regretted not taking it more seriously. The strange thing was that as soon as she approached the casket, the smell in the room changed. It wasn't rotten or like candle wax. It was an old smell, like things stored away for too long. But the worst part was the air became heavy, as if the ceiling had dropped a couple of feet. Nobody could breathe properly, and nobody commented. Everyone was quiet. Even the crying had stopped. The most bizarre thing was that she didn't kneel down right away. She stood there for a while beside the body, just moving her toes as if feeling the floor. Her hand trembled, but it was a strange tremor, like someone with intense anxiety or contained rage. Suddenly, she knelt slowly without supporting herself on anything, as if her knees had no bones. My uncle squeezed my hand so hard it hurt and whispered, "She's going to lick." I swear I didn't understand at first, but when she lifted the veil, I can't even explain it. That tongue looked like leather, dry, dark, far too long. She ran her tongue over my aunt's foot as if tasting something. My aunt's foot had been clean before, but afterward it looked somewhat dark, somewhat glossy, as if someone had applied shoe polish. It was the first time I'd felt disgusted by a dead person. The bizarre thing was that nobody moved. Seriously, everyone was watching, but it seemed like nobody could do anything. Couldn't speak, couldn't get up, couldn't change the subject, as if time had stopped just in that part of the room. The worst part was that I truly felt we weren't alone there anymore. There was something more with her, as if she brought a weight along, a presence that occupied the entire corner, but that you couldn't look at directly. After she licked both of my aunt's feet, she got very close to her face, very close, like inches away, and then whispered something in the dead woman's ear. I didn't understand what it was. Nobody understood, but my uncle, who was closest, turned pale immediately. He just shook his head and said quietly, "She said now she's a mirror." I asked what he meant by that, and he just said, "A mirror doesn't keep anything, it just reflects. And now she's going to reflect her." Man, that gave me chills immediately because my aunt had died peacefully, in her sleep, without pain, without anything. And now it seemed like she was carrying something heavy. Her face had changed, became more tense, more contracted, even though she was already dead. The strangest thing was that when the old woman got up, she didn't use her hands. She slid backward as if gliding and left the floor somewhat wet. I know it sounds crazy, but it really looked like that trail snails leave, only thicker, like slime or something. The strangest thing was what happened afterward, because we buried my aunt the next day as custom dictates, without celebration, without crying, just a somewhat heavy silence. It seemed like everyone wanted to forget quickly, but 3 days later it really hit home. First, it was her husband. He woke up early, went to heat water, collapsed in the kitchen. Heart attack. But here's the detail: he was healthy, never had any heart problems. 2 days before, he was cleaning the yard, climbing ladders, carrying full buckets. Nobody understood. The next day, her son had a stroke in his sleep. He was only 42 years old, never smoked, didn't drink, walked every week. And then, to complete it, the 8-year-old granddaughter disappeared. She was playing in the woods like she always did and didn't come back. They searched for days, called in firefighters, search dogs, even a helicopter. They never found even a shoe or a hair ribbon. Nothing. That's when my uncle said, "It's always like this. 3, never less, never more." And the thing that still gives me chills today is that after the 3rd day, the candles left over from the wake were melted, but without being lit again, like someone had used just the heat, and the tips seemed to have nail marks. Since that day, nobody wants to hold wakes at home here in our area. They prefer to rush and bury the same day, under sun or rain, just to avoid the risk of her appearing again. To this day, when I remember this, I get that same feeling from the wake, that something was left unfinished, like the story didn't end there. Because sometimes at dawn, I wake up with that same sensation from the wake, the heavy air, the dogs too quiet, a candle that goes out by itself. And I know it might just be in my head, but the truth is that after you see something like that, you never sleep the same way again. The last time I went to the cemetery to visit my aunt's grave, there was a greenish trail passing between two graves. And you know what's worse? There wasn't even any moss nearby. So now I ask you, has anyone out there ever seen a similar figure? Someone who arrives at the end of a wake and asks to bless the body. Any story similar to this, one of those that nobody believes until it happens to their own family. And seriously, would you let a stranger touch the body of someone from your family? I never believed in these stories. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. I never believed in the witch stories that people tell in rural areas. I grew up hearing my grandmother talk about love charms, herbal baths, candles for St. Anthony. But to me, it was always just superstition stuff for people who need to believe in some explanation for bad luck in life. I've worked as a rural delivery driver since 2011, driving dirt roads in rural New Mexico, going from ranch to ranch, settlement to settlement. I've seen a lot of strange things, but nothing I couldn't explain with logic. Animals on the road, people with mental problems, old folks talking to themselves. This story I'm about to tell happened on one of those deliveries near a place called Mirror Lake, a real end-of-the-world spot. Red dirt road, tall brush on both sides, no cell signal. I arrived at an isolated house, pretty simple, with the smell of smoke in the air and silence that was too heavy for that time of day. I clapped my hands, and a voice from inside responded, "Come on in. Just need to sign the receipt here in the kitchen." I wanted to seem foolish at first, because that's exactly how it started. I know it seems stupid to enter a house in the middle of nowhere without knowing anyone, but anyone who works rural delivery knows how it is. People are usually simple, welcoming, and if someone says come in, you go in. Especially when the package needs to be signed for, and the sun is beating down on your head. But there in that house, I can't explain it, the air seemed thick. It was too hot, but it wasn't normal heat. It seemed like heat from inside, heat coming from the floor, from the wood, from the skin itself. The kitchen was small with a wood stove burning, and smoke rising straight up through a hole in the ceiling. There was a sweet smell in the air, like burnt cinnamon mixed with something stronger, like overripe fruit or spoiled meat, maybe. The woman had her back turned, stirring a pot with a huge wooden spoon. The strange thing was that she didn't even turn when she heard my footsteps, just pointed with her hand toward the table where there were some greasy papers. But the most bizarre thing was still to come. The really strange thing was when she turned around. I swear I was calm until she turned around. Until then, it was just a strange house, too hot, with a somewhat quiet lady, nothing out of the ordinary for someone who drives around farms and dirt roads. But the way she turned was weird. It seemed like her body took a second longer than normal, you know. Like the bones were slower than the skin. And when she looked at me, that's when I froze. Her face was all wrinkled, looked like crumpled paper. Up to that point, fine, I've seen many elderly ladies with time stamped on their faces. But the strange thing were the eyes. They had no color. They were smooth like frosted glass, no pupil, no shine, just that milky white still, as if she wasn't really seeing me. But she was seeing. I know she was seeing because her eyes followed me exactly as I approached the table. And the worst part was her hand. Her fingers were bent backward, all of them, like they had been broken the wrong way but still working. She picked up the papers and handled them with absurd precision, as if it were normal to have fingers turned that way. They looked like paws, human paws. And she looked at me as if she already knew this would freeze me up. I should have left right then. I'm serious. I could have pretended I forgot the paper, that the delivery was for another address, anything. But I stayed there, somewhat frozen, trying to pretend everything was fine. She extended the receipt to me. The paper was stained with something dark in the corner, somewhat sticky, looked like old ink or I don't know what. But the most bizarre thing wasn't the paper, it was the pen. It wasn't a pen. It was a feather, a long black feather with a sharp tip like a knife. And she said calmly and hoarsely, "Sign with this." So I laughed nervously, said I didn't need to, that I could fill it out myself. And that's when she bit her own finger slowly, as if she were used to it, until blood flowed, and wrote her name right there with her bleeding finger, as if it were normal. But there's a detail. What really gave me chills was that while she was writing, I heard her voice saying my name, but her mouth was closed. Didn't move a muscle. It seemed like the voice was coming from the wall or the ceiling or from inside my head. She finished signing, looked up at me, and said with that hollow voice without moving her mouth again, "Now you owe me a visit. The house will remember." I ran out of the house, got on my bike, and headed back to the road. Scared. That night I didn't sleep. And it wasn't insomnia, it was different. It seemed like someone had turned off my head suddenly, like when you pass out after taking anesthesia. I don't remember lying down or closing my eyes or thinking about anything. I simply stopped being awake. And when I saw myself again, I was inside the same house, only it wasn't the same anymore. The floor was rotten, the boards creaked as if they were wet inside. There was a smell that made me nauseous, half sweet and half sour, like old meat forgotten in the heat. And the stove was still burning, but now it spat thick black smoke that seemed alive, like those smoke snakes that come out in spirals, only moving the wrong way. The walls, man, the walls were dripping. There was a dark, thick goo sliding down slowly like tears from something dead. And the worst part was that I knew it was the same place. I recognized the details, the hole in the ceiling, the crooked table, even the pot on the stove was the same. Only everything was rotted. And the most bizarre thing, on the floor there were marks, as if someone had dragged themselves on their belly, with nails scratching the wood. And these marks went to a dark corner of the kitchen. And there she was, crouched down, eating something that looked like me. I know it sounds absurd what I'm saying, but there's no way to make up something like this. What she was eating there in the corner was something soft, somewhat shapeless, looked like it was made of meat and hair. And the worst part, it had a face. A face somewhat stuck on without eyes, but I knew it was mine. I felt it was mine. I don't know how to explain this. It was like seeing yourself dead, but not exactly. It was more like seeing a part of yourself being digested. And I stood there paralyzed, looking at that scene without being able to move a finger. And the strangest thing was that when I took a step, she stopped eating and turned. But she didn't turn her body. She just turned her entire head, rotated it all the way to her back, as if there were no bone in her neck. And her fingers snapped all back into the wrong position, like they were broken toy parts. And then she got up slowly with that colorless gaze and spoke. But this time it wasn't with that hoarse voice, it was with mine. She used exactly my voice, same tone, same way, and said, "You're already here." Just like that, simple, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I woke up in my room, sweating, with my clothes all stuck to my body and a pain in my neck, as if they had pulled me into something. My head was throbbing, but what bothered me most was the feeling that I was still there, as if a part of me had stayed in that house. At first I thought it had just been a nightmare too heavy because of the heat, or I don't know, something I ate. But then things started happening that, man, you can't explain. Every time I take a dirt road, anyone in any region, my GPS freezes, like really freezes. And then it starts recalculating the route by itself and sends me to that same place, Mirror Lake, even if I'm miles away from there. I've tried deleting the delivery from the system, asked to change routes, made up excuses to avoid that area. But the most bizarre thing is that every time someone from the office tries to take over the delivery for me, something happens. One guy got a flat tire, another fell off his bike. One didn't even come back, asked for a transfer, and never showed up in the region again. And the strange thing is that last week I received a new package order, same name, same address. And in the recipient field, written by hand in red, very shaky, as if someone had written it in anger, he promised to come back. The truth is I stopped trying to understand. At first I wanted an explanation, you know. I wanted to believe it was just a weird dream, a breakdown, or even something they put in my drink without me noticing. But nowadays, I just avoid the subject. Avoid passing through that region. Avoid looking at deliveries too much. Avoid commenting with anyone at work. And when some route near Mirror Lake shows up, I accept without arguing. Look, I'm getting old now. I've seen a lot of things in this life, good things, bad things, things we pray to forget. But there's one memory that to this day I don't really know if it was a dream, if it was the madness of a child's head, or if it really happened. Sometimes I try to tell this story, but the words don't come out right. I only know that when I talk about it, my hands start to sweat and my chest tightens as if time goes back to that dawn in 2004. I must have been about 9 years old. It was during the intense heat season there in rural Alabama, one of those days when the air seems still, heavy, hard to breathe. My aunt had just had Isabella, a girl so small it seemed like the wind would carry her away. My grandmother kept saying she was born marked, with a weak aura, old people stuff. Everyone laughed, mocked, said it was nonsense. But my grandmother was serious, spoke looking up as if seeing things we couldn't see. And that's when everything started going wrong. The strange thing is that during that week it seemed like everything was somewhat odd in my aunt's house. And it wasn't big things, you know. It was silly stuff, but it kept building up. The kettle would whistle by itself at dawn. The neighbor's dog, which was a mean mutt, suddenly started hiding under the wagon and wouldn't come out, not even for food. And the most bizarre thing was Isabella. We thought it was normal for a newborn to look at nothing, right? But she seemed to follow something with her eyes, like she would fix on the ceiling and keep tracking as if something was walking there, very slowly. Sometimes she would smile out of nowhere, but it wasn't a baby smile. It was a cold smile, like someone seeing things we shouldn't see. My aunt even tried to fix it, tied a red ribbon on the crib as the old prayer demanded, but the truth is nobody wanted to do the guts ritual. Too messy, they said. Old-fashioned stuff. My grandmother got grumpy, just fingering her rosary and looking out the window like someone who knows it's already too late. The strangest thing is that the more we tried to follow normal life, the more unexplainable things happened. Like there was this one dawn when I woke up thirsty, and when I passed by my aunt's room door, I swear I saw the crib rocking by itself. It wasn't that wind rocking, no. It was like someone was rocking Isabella gently, almost lovingly. But the room was stuffy, still, and there wasn't even a breeze passing through there. Then there was another time when we found black feathers scattered around the house. No black chickens nearby, nobody raising that kind of animal. Grandma just looked, took a deep breath, and said quietly, "They're already circling." We pretended we didn't hear. It's easy to laugh at these things during the day, but at night fear grows, seems to get under your skin. And the worst was the last time Isabella looked at me. She was in the crib, somewhat quiet, and suddenly her eyes turned to me in a way I'll never forget. It seemed like she was asking for help, but didn't know how. But there's a detail that never left my head. That night, before everything happened, the wind simply stopped. And look, in rural areas, there's always that little dawn breeze that passes through the cracks in the house and makes the door creak. But not that night. The air seemed dead, heavy. Even the smell of the house was strange, somewhat sour, like when you forget meat outside the fridge. My grandmother, who never failed to pray before sleeping, sat in her chair in silence. Didn't even look at anyone, just moved her fingers on the rosary very slowly, as if each bead weighed a ton. I remember trying to play with the dog outside, and he wouldn't come out from under the wagon no matter what. He trembled like a green stick, and there I was, silly, trying to pull him to play. The truth is we knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to be the first to say it. It was easier to pretend it was just a stuffy night. But deep down, everyone was already feeling that something was coming, and that we weren't going to be able to stop it. The bizarre thing is that in the middle of that still dawn, out of nowhere, a windstorm started that seemed like it wanted to tear the roof off the house. It wasn't that usual little breeze, no. It was a strong, hot, somewhat dirty wind that beat against the windows as if something wanted to get in. And it was so sudden that I remember waking up to the sound of doors slamming and my mother yelling for people to close everything. But here's a detail. When the wind stopped, a silence came that I've never heard the same again. A silence so big that even the sound of my heartbeat seemed too loud. Not the crickets, not the dog, not the neighbor's rooster. Nothing. I remember running after my mother and my aunt, who were already at Isabella's room door. And when we went in, it seemed silly, but it felt like the air was cold in there, even with the heat outside. The crib was there, but empty. And the worst was what was in Isabella's place. But there's one thing I could never forget. On the crib mattress, where Isabella should have been, there was something coiled like a snake, but it wasn't any animal. It was a thick chain made of dried guts, wrapped around the bars, all braided as if it had been made there in front of us without anyone seeing. The smell was horrible, a mixture of rotten meat with old rust that stuck in your nose and didn't come out even after washing the whole house. And the strangest thing was that the crib was perfect. No struggle marks, no sign that anyone had entered or left. The window closed, the door locked. There was no trail on the beaten ground, no footprint, no nothing. It was as if the girl had evaporated, taken away by something that didn't even need to open a path. My grandmother just looked, lowered her head, and spoke in that way that gives chills even today. They came to get what wasn't protected. And then I understood. The red ribbon didn't help. What really protected was the ritual that everyone thought was nonsense. But now it was too late, much too late. The most bizarre thing was that after that, nobody ever saw a sign of Isabella again. They searched for weeks, scoured thick woods, old wells, muddy rivers, even brought people from outside to help, but it was as if she had never existed. No trace, no clothes thrown around, not a thread of hair. Nothing, just that bad smell that took months to leave the house. But there's a detail that few people know. In the following months, 3 old women from the region disappeared too. Women who lived alone, who people already whispered that they messed with wrong things. Each one disappeared, leaving only bizarre remains behind: pieces of braided hair, pulled teeth, nail pieces on top of altars made in the woods. And the worst, every year in the first week of October, there's always someone who swears they hear crying coming from the middle of the dry brush. A weak, tired crying, like a lost child calling for their mother. And honestly, to this day, I don't know if it's the wind playing tricks, or if there's really something out there waiting for us to forget, so it can take someone else. I always thought these witchcraft stories were nonsense, stuff for people who grew up hearing legends to scare children. I always thought those witchcraft stories were nonsense stuff for people who grew up hearing legends to scare children. I myself grew up on a farm in rural Texas, surrounded by brush and dirt roads, and heard a lot of things about witches that turn into animals, that haunt chicken coops, that steal the souls of newborns. These conversations never made sense to me. I always thought people saw an armadillo running in the brush and already said it was the devil. I know it seems strange that I'm here telling this, but anyway, there are things you experience that knock down any certainty you had. Even so, I'll try to be as rational as possible, because to this day, I keep asking myself if it wasn't just some kind of crazy dream. But honestly, there are things that don't add up, and that's what I wanted to talk about. If you grew up hearing these stories, maybe you'll understand better what I felt that dawn. Well, for you to understand better, I lived on this somewhat abandoned farm in the middle of the brush, right? It was 2009, and I was in my early 20s, working on a plantation nearby. Nothing special, just that country life. The house was simple, rough cement floor, clay tile roof, and the gate was one of those iron ones that's always creaking in the wind. No proper electricity, sometimes just oil lamp. At the time, I was living alone because my parents had already passed away a few years back. Everything was fine, right? Quiet, peaceful life. Well, peaceful until that dawn. Because like this, I was sleeping heavy, don't even remember if I had dreamed or not. I only know I woke up to a noise at the gate, like a dry scratching, somewhat rhythmic, you know. At first I thought it was some possum or wild dog. These things happen. But there's a detail that made me somewhat uncomfortable. The noise was somewhat measured, as if someone was there scratching on purpose, It wasn't an animal trying to get in, it was more like nails, nails scraping iron in a way that seemed to want to call attention. And look, I don't scare easily, but that day I felt something bad in my stomach. That cold that starts small but goes up your back without you being able to control it. The strange thing was that even though I was dying of sleep, something made me get up from bed. It wasn't fear yet. It was more that feeling that if I ignored it, it would be worse. Like that restlessness you feel when you think you left the door open, I went to the window slowly, pushing the curtain with my fingertips, not even knowing exactly what I expected to see. And to my surprise, there was a rooster standing there. But it wasn't a normal rooster. It was huge, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen around there. It was right in front of the gate, quiet, stiff, as if it had been carved there. But the worst wasn't the size. The worst were the eyes. I know it seems silly, but the moment I laid eyes on that animal, my stomach knotted up. Because those eyes weren't animal eyes, they were people's eyes. Gray, deep, in that way that seems to be looking inside you, And the most bizarre thing is that even so, my head tried to make excuses. Must be the moon's reflection. Maybe it's tiredness. Maybe it's not even a rooster, it's just an impression. But deep down, I already knew something was very wrong. At the time, I didn't even think straight about what I was doing. I just grabbed a broom that was leaning behind the door, as if that would solve anything, right? I went out somewhat on impulse, trembling more from anger at myself than from fear, because deep down I wanted to believe it was just a big rooster, and that's it. Didn't want to give in to those stories I'd always made fun of. But there's a detail that freezes me even today when I remember. When I got close to the gate, the rooster didn't move. It kept staring at me, standing there. Then suddenly it opened its beak slowly, and what came out wasn't a crow or an animal noise. It was my mother's voice, exactly the same, and my mother had been dead for more than 4 years. "Come here, son," she said with that dragged, somewhat hoarse voice, exactly the way she used to call when I was a kid and was playing far from home. I swear my legs simply locked up. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything. But I just stood there holding that ridiculous broom, looking at that animal that shouldn't be talking, much less with my dead mother's voice. The bizarre thing is that when I thought I'd already seen the worst, the rooster, or whatever that thing was, took a step forward. And then what I saw has no right explanation. Its body started cracking loud, like dry wood breaking. Its legs got long, somewhat crooked, and I swear I saw the bones moving under the skin as if they didn't fit right in that shape. The strangest thing was its neck. It seemed like the skin was getting thin, stretching too much, until it tore on one side. And from the tear, thick black smoke started coming out that had such a strong smell, so strong that I almost threw up right there. It was a smell of old blood mixed with something burned, like rotten meat thrown in the fire. And I couldn't move no matter how much my head screamed to run. My body seemed nailed to the ground. I could only watch that thing falling apart in front of me, as if it were normal to see an animal dismantling like that in the middle of the dawn. The worst is that in the middle of the smoke, I swear I saw a shadow of a person, but crawling on the ground as if trying to drag itself into the earth. The strange thing was that after a few seconds, or I don't know, I completely lost track of time. The smoke started disappearing. And when I forced myself to take 2 steps forward, the rooster wasn't there anymore. In its place, there was just a pile of burned feathers, all scattered in the mud. And the most bizarre thing was the mark left in the mud right in front of the gate. There were 2 marks of human hands, as if someone had dragged themselves there. But it wasn't animal tracks or footprints or anything you could explain easily. They were hands, thin, long fingers, somewhat deep in the wet earth, pointing straight at my house. And the worst is that I still tried to convince myself it was an illusion, that maybe I had dreamed it all, that maybe it was some kind of delirium. But the next morning, when the sun hit, the feathers were still there. And the marks too. I swept everything through water, tried to forget. But since that night, every Friday of the waning moon, I wake up at dawn to scratching at the gate. Always the same way. And when I get the courage to look, there are new hand marks in the mud. Always fresh, always pointing toward the house. And that's it, folks. That was the last story of the night. If you enjoyed this bizarre story and want to hear more tales like this, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been through something that made you doubt reality too? I'd love to read what you have to share. It all started on an ordinary afternoon in rural Montana, just kid stuff really. I must have been 6, maybe 7 years old. My family lived on a ranch near the Beartooth Mountains, and I spent my days wandering through the woods, making up adventures, catching bugs, that sort of thing. There was no danger, or at least that's what everyone thought. But there was this one day when I got lost. I don't remember exactly how it happened. I just remember following a new trail, distracted by some rocks that seemed to glitter in the sunlight. And when I looked up, the forest had grown too thick, and the path had disappeared. I walked, called for help, shouted nothing. As I kept walking, I found a house. An old house, really small, with a crooked tin roof and a crocheted curtain in the window. There was a smell of something warm coming from inside, like warm milk porridge. I was tired, hungry, and didn't know what to do, so I went to the door and knocked. The woman who opened it, I swear on everything holy, had no eyes. I know it sounds like something a scared kid would make up, but I swear I remember everything as if it happened yesterday. And the strangest thing is, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. I was there in that moment. I froze. She stood in the doorway without saying anything, just staring at me with that empty face. It was as if her eyes had been erased with an eraser, you know. Like when you look at a wall where there used to be a picture, the outline is still there, but what should occupy that space has vanished. But there was something about her manner that prevented me from running. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't kindness either. It was like that feeling you get when you enter an old church, an automatic kind of respect, you know. I can't explain it. She simply turned around and went inside, and I followed. The house was the size of a garage, everything made of old, dark wood. There was a small table in the corner, 2 chairs, and a clay stove on the floor with a clay pot on top. The porridge was there, bubbling slowly, as if it had been made for me. And here comes what gives me chills to this day. She didn't speak. She didn't have her mouth sewn shut or anything. She just didn't speak. She served me in a deep bowl, pushed the chair toward me, and sat across from me. I ate, and she watched with that eyeless face. At the time, I didn't think about anything. I just obeyed. It was as if something inside me said I should eat. The smell was good, warm, familiar even. But when I put the spoon in my mouth, I tasted something I could never forget. It wasn't blood, it wasn't rust, it was something else. Like the taste had memory, as if what I was eating knew things about me that I didn't even know myself. And when I finished, I wasn't lost anymore. The strangest thing is that after that day, no one ever brought up this subject with me. My parents said I just showed up at the gate, all dirty with mud and wide-eyed. They didn't even know I had gotten lost. And the worst part, I couldn't explain it properly either. I just kept saying that a woman had given me porridge, but my dad thought it was some local resident. He said it must have been some kind lady who helped me. But no one around there knew of any house on that path. And every time I tried to retrace the route, it was as if the forest had swallowed everything whole. At the time, I was just a kid, right? And as much as I felt something was wrong, I let it go. I grew up, got on with life. My parents moved to town. My routine became different: school, work, crowded buses, bills, everything we call normal. But there's one detail that haunted me. Every time I smelled warm milk or corn porridge, that taste would come back, and with it, a strange sensation, as if I had eaten something that wasn't meant to be eaten. And as if something was still watching me, waiting. Then 12 years later, when I barely remembered the details properly, I decided to go back. I don't know what came over me. I just know I woke up one Sunday with it hammering in my head. I took the car, followed the old road, stopped at the edge of the woods, and started walking. I just wanted to see if the house was still there. The strange thing started before I even got to the place. On the road, about 15 minutes before the point where I thought I should enter the woods, my nose started bleeding out of nowhere. I'd never had problems with that before, never had low blood pressure or anything. I just felt a metallic taste coming from my throat, and when I touched my hand, it was dirty. And the worst part, the taste was exactly the same as that porridge. It seems like a silly coincidence, but that's when I got that chill that starts at the nape of your neck and goes down your whole body. And still I continued. I parked the car, crossed the wire fence, and went into the woods. But there's something that didn't make sense. The path was different. The vegetation seemed taller than it should be, like no one had passed through there in many years. Which is strange, because it was near a known trail point. And the strangest thing was that the further I walked, the more silent it became. No animals, no wind, no sound of branches crackling. Not the kind that calms you, but the kind that tightens your chest. And that's when I saw it. On the ground, among the dry leaves, there was a piece of crochet, yellowed, dirty, almost rotten, just like the curtain from that house window. I shouldn't have picked it up, but I did. The strangest thing is that after I picked up that piece of crochet, it seemed like time choked. Like I looked at the sky and the light was different. It wasn't late afternoon, but the sun seemed kind of dimmed, as if it was going through an invisible drizzle. And the worst part, the fabric started getting warm in my hand. At first, I thought it was something in my head, but I swear it was warm. And there wasn't even direct sunlight. It was a strange warmth, kind of humid, as if it had just come off a body. That's when I was already regretting it. I thought about dropping it and going back to the car. But when I turned to retrace my path, I couldn't find it. The woods behind me looked different. What was a path before now just looked like brush, as if I had been pushed into a place that didn't want to be found. And the silence got worse. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was like a pressure, as if the air had thickened. It was even hard to breathe properly. And then I started hearing a sound. Very low, almost imperceptible, but repeated. It was a little sound of a spoon hitting a bowl. Tap, 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 always with the same interval, always the same sound. Tap, tap, tap. And the smell of porridge started invading the place. Sweet, warm, and underneath again, that taste that made me nauseous even without having anything in my mouth. And then I saw it. There, ahead in the middle of the woods, there was a kind of clearing, and in the middle of it, a chair facing me. But there was one detail. The chair was rocking by itself. The strangest thing was that when I reached the clearing, I knew right away that something there was way too wrong. Not wrong like a dangerous place. Wrong like a place that shouldn't exist. The chair was still rocking by itself, but what really froze me was seeing her again. Standing next to the clay stove, which was now lit as if it had never been put out. Smoke rising slowly, full of that sweet, nauseating smell, and the porridge bubbling. But the strangest thing was what she was doing. She was holding something with both hands carefully, as if it were a small animal. When I got closer, I saw what it was, a toad. But it wasn't a live toad. It was dry, kind of desiccated, like an animal that had died days ago. But she held it as if it were still breathing. And then, with a calm that turned my stomach, she bit the toad. That's right, she sunk her teeth into it in a kind of automatic way, without making noise, and swallowed the piece without blinking. I froze. I couldn't move a muscle. I just stood there watching. Then she turned her face toward me, and even without eyes, even without her mouth moving, she spoke. The voice didn't come from her mouth because her mouth didn't move. The voice came directly into my head. Low, raspy, as if it had been born inside my skull. She said, "You ate what you shouldn't have eaten, boy. Now you carry the taste." And when she said that, I felt the spoon in my hand. I hadn't even noticed I was holding it. The bowl appeared again, as if it had sprouted from the ground, and inside the porridge. But this time there was more stuff in it. There were pieces, small, dark pieces that moved slightly, as if they had life. She spoke again, louder. "If you don't finish, you go back to where you came from." And I knew exactly what she meant. I want to say I ran away, that I threw the bowl far away and woke up at home as if it were just a nightmare. But that's not what happened. The truth is, I ate again. My hand was shaking, my eyes were burning, my head was spinning, but I brought the spoon to my mouth. I don't remember swallowing. I just remember the texture and the taste. The taste was worse now. There was something rotten underneath, but it wasn't spoiled meat. It was something that seemed rotten from the inside out. And with each spoonful came a whisper, as if she were talking inside me. I didn't understand the words, but I felt the weight of them. It seemed like each word was tearing a piece of me away and putting something else in its place. When I finished, the clearing was empty. The stove was out, the chair was still, and the bowl had disappeared. I managed to get back to the car, I don't know how. The woods seemed clearer, the path opened up. But since that day, nothing has been normal. And the worst part is the taste. I still feel the taste. Not all the time, but sometimes out of nowhere, like when I'm brushing my teeth, or when I eat something warm, it comes back. That sweet, heavy taste, impossible to describe. And there's something else. Every night at 3:17, always at that time, I wake up with the same sensation, as if someone were sitting on the edge of the bed. The chair in my room, that wooden one, creaks by itself. And sometimes, I swear, the air gets warmer, like in the clearing. And every time that happens, I'm sure I ate something I shouldn't have. And that she's waiting for the next spoonful. Look, I know how this is going to sound, but if you've ever bought something from a thrift store, thinking you were getting a historical find like, wow, this must have come from Europe in the last century, then you'll understand me. My find was an iron ring, heavy, dark, with some crooked scratches around it, as if someone had tried to write something on it. I thought it was stylish. This was in 2008 at a thrift store kind of hidden away in Little Italy, San Francisco. I paid $20 and left there feeling like Indiana Jones himself. And before anyone says it, no, I didn't believe in these things. I never believed in energy, witchcraft, or curses. The only thing I believed in back then was that old iron and worn leather made any outfit more underground. And that's what I wanted. I was the guy who said, stop being crazy. That's all psychological. The strangest thing is that even with all that skeptical attitude, I could never wear that ring for more than 15 minutes. Something always happened. I'd start getting headaches like a stabbing pain right behind my eyes, or my hand would start sweating as if I had a fever, but only on that finger. Once my nose bled, I swear. I'd put the ring on and it seemed like my body wanted to expel it, but I always found an excuse. It must be the weight of the metal. It's because it heats up too much. I'm just being paranoid. Until something happened that made me start taking the ring seriously. And when I say seriously, I mean looking at it with a bit of fear. It was just some random night when you can't sleep and decide to rummage through old junk. This was already in 2013, so 5 years after I'd bought the damn thing. And yes, it was still with me, stored in a little box along with other things I never used anymore. I don't even know why I picked it up. I think I just wanted to see it up close again because the box was full of dust and I wanted to throw some things away. But here comes the strange part. As soon as I touched the ring, like literally just touched it with my fingertip, the light bulb in my room burned out instantly. And the worst part, it was the third time that week. But this time was different. I felt like a shock, but not one of those that hurt. It was something deeper, as if my head had been pulled into a tunnel without leaving the spot. And then comes the most bizarre part, because right after the bulb exploded, my phone vibrated. And this was what, like 2 in the morning. I looked, thinking it was some random notification, but no. It was an alarm I hadn't programmed. And the alarm name was just a strange character, as if it had bugged out. Like a symbol I'd never seen, a kind of circle with a line, as if it had been drawn by hand. It might seem silly, but that messed with me in a way I can't explain properly. Because I'm organized. I never leave alarms programmed carelessly. And to this day, I don't know how that got there. The truth is, that was the first time I wanted to get rid of the ring. But for some reason, I couldn't do it. I even put it in the trash, I swear. And an hour later, I was there, going through the garbage to get it back. The strange thing is that after that alarm business, I started noticing some things in my body. Nothing like a horror movie, no marks appearing or black eyes. No, it was more subtle, but worse because it seemed too real. Like you could doubt it for a few days, but then you couldn't ignore it anymore. I started having really strange sensations in the finger where I used to wear the ring, even without wearing it. Sometimes it would sting, as if there were a thin needle going right into the middle of the nail. Other times it would heat up out of nowhere, as if someone had touched a match to it. And once I woke up with it all swollen, red, as if I'd taken a hit. But I slept alone and hadn't hit anything. And the strangest thing was that it was always the same finger. It never hurt anywhere else. Just there, as if the ring had marked the spot even after all that time. I even went to the doctor once. I said I thought it might be a delayed allergic reaction or some old injury. But the tests didn't show anything. He just said I must be stressed. And I almost accepted that as an answer. Almost, but there's a detail. Around the same time, I started having strange dreams. And I don't usually remember my dreams. But these ones, I'd wake up sweating, kind of dizzy, as if I'd run a marathon with my heart in my throat. And the strangest thing was it was always the same place. A dark room with a single candle lit on the floor. And a sound I couldn't identify properly. It sounded like a hum or a dragging voice trying to speak low, but without forming any words. And the worst part, even without seeing anyone, I knew someone was there with me. Always. I didn't see them, but I felt them, as if they were looking at me the whole time, but waiting for me to say something. But I never spoke. And I always woke up like that, with the ring finger burning as if it had been scorched. The most bizarre thing was when the dream started following into real life. And I know that sentence is already strange by itself, but it's the most direct way to explain what started happening. Because one thing is dreaming about a strange place and waking up scared. Now seeing that place with your eyes open is another story. There was one night I was coming back from work, really tired, and decided to get off the bus stop 1 block early just to take a walk and clear my head. And there, on the way, passing through a little cobblestone street kind of hidden away, I saw a door. A red door with peeling paint and a doorknob very similar to the one from the dream. Identical. It was just a door in the middle of a high wall, no windows, and there was no visible house, no sign, nothing. But it seemed like I'd passed by there 1,000 times. And the worst part, I knew that behind that door was the room from the dream. I stood there staring at that door for about 2 minutes without moving, with the strange feeling that if I stretched out my hand and turned the doorknob, something would really change. But I didn't change anything. I just left, kind of running, kind of trying not to look like a crazy person. Because by then, fear had already surpassed skepticism. I was still trying to convince myself it was all coincidence, that maybe my mind had created that room from some real memory. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't that. But there's a detail. When I got home, I decided to look up the name of that little street on Google Maps just to see where it led. And the truth is, it doesn't exist on the map. I searched everything, tried to find it by satellite, by number, even by facade photo. Nothing. The street I walked on doesn't appear anywhere. And the worst part was that same night, the dream changed. It wasn't just the room with the candle anymore. There was a figure in the corner now, dark, still, as if it had been painted there. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but I knew it was looking. And I knew it had come from that door. The strangest thing was when the ring disappeared, really disappeared. And before anyone says, you lost it and forgot where you put it, no, man. I left it in that little box where it always stayed, inside the dresser drawer. And I'm anal about this stuff. Only I messed around there. And out of nowhere, on some random Tuesday, it wasn't there anymore. And then comes the bizarre part. I thought I'd feel relieved, like, phew, it's gone, the nonsense is over. But no, what I felt was panic, an emptiness in my stomach, a strange urgency to find it. Like I'd left the front door open or forgotten to pick someone up at the airport. A guilt that didn't make sense, but was real. And that scared me more than the ring itself. But there's a detail. The night I noticed it was missing, I dreamed about that room again. But this time there was no candle. It was all dark, everything. But I knew I was there. I felt the cold floor, heard that hum again. But now it seemed closer, clearer, as if someone were trying to form words. And in the back, where the candle used to be, there was something shining. Small, metallic, and I didn't even need to get close to know what it was. It was the ring. But this time I woke up with sound. This had never happened before. It was as if the noise from the dream had leaked into the real world. A metallic sound, like something rolling on the floor. I got up startled, still kind of groggy, and went straight to the living room. And when I turned on the light, the ring was in the middle of the rug, in the middle of the living room, closed, intact, with those same crooked scratches around it. And the worst part, the rug is shaggy, thick. Something that size couldn't just roll there, and I live alone. The living room door was locked, the windows closed. There was no way. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at that thing. And the only thing going through my head was, it came back by itself. The truth is, after that night, I didn't want to know about the ring anymore. I didn't want to face it, didn't want to try to understand it. I just wanted to get rid of that thing. And this time it wasn't like, I'll throw it away and see what happens. No, I was really scared. Fear of the kind that makes you nauseous. That makes you lock the living room door, even knowing you're alone. So the next day, as soon as dawn broke, I went to an empty lot near my house. I took the ring with a piece of cloth, because yes, I was kind of disgusted, I don't know, and threw it hard into the middle of the weeds. And I didn't look back, didn't want to see where it fell. I went back home trying to convince myself that it was just a ring, that everything had been stuff in my head, that fatigue, stress, the dreams, everything had an explanation. But the strangest thing was what happened that night. Because when I went to sleep, I felt relief, as if I'd taken a weight off my chest. I fell asleep quickly, something that hadn't happened in weeks, but there's a detail. In the middle of the night, I woke up with the feeling that someone was standing in the corner of my room. And it wasn't just a feeling, I saw it. Not clearly, but I saw it. A silhouette standing dark, as if the shadow had more shadow than the rest. And the worst part, it didn't move. It was just there, looking. I turned on the light on impulse, blinked several times. Nothing. The corner was empty. But I kept having the impression that someone was still there. Like the air was heavy, as if it had been occupied by something that hadn't really left. And then the next day, when I was leaving the house, the ring was in my backpack. In the front pocket, the one I never use. Closed properly, not even dirty from the earth, as if it had been placed there carefully. And that's when I tell you with complete honesty, I have no idea what's happening anymore. But I know it wasn't me. And I know that somehow that doesn't make sense. It came back again. Well, what I'm going to tell you now might sound strange after everything I've said, but I managed to get rid of the ring for real. And it wasn't by throwing it away, burying it, or leaving it anywhere around. Because the truth is, I tried all that several times, and it always came back. Always. What worked in the end was taking it back. Simple as that. I went back to Little Italy after more than 10 years, went to that same thrift store. Or better, what I thought was that thrift store, because the place was different. Emptier, darker. It looked almost abandoned, but with the door open. There was a woman inside. Not the same one from before, but she looked at me as if she knew me. I didn't even need to explain anything. I just took the ring out of my pocket and handed it to her, and she just said, "Took you long enough." But she understood. No anger, no threat tone. Like someone who was just waiting for the right time. Since that day, the ring hasn't come back. And look, I've done everything to test it. I moved furniture, went through my backpack, left the box open. Nothing. I never dreamed about the room again, never saw silhouettes, never felt my finger tingling. But there's a detail. Since that day, I wake up every night at exactly 3 o'clock. Not scared, not sweating, not with noise. I just wake up, look at the ceiling, stay there for a few minutes as if I were waiting for something, and then go back to sleep. It's not a nightmare, it's not terror, but it's not normal either. And the truth is, I never went into another thrift store again. But if one day you find an iron ring, dark, with crooked scratches around it, don't put it on your finger. Not even as a joke. Anyone who's had a small child knows that exhaustion becomes routine, and you learn to tell when something is really wrong. And back then, no matter how much I tried to pretend it was all in my head, I knew there was something wrong with my son, with the house, with me. It was in 1993, in the Texas Panhandle. I lived in a small town near Amarillo, in a piece of land that barely had a proper name. Around those parts, if you ask someone about the thread-tongue women, you'll hear its legend, that it's just stories to scare children. But if you look closely into the person's eyes, you'll see it's not quite like that. Everyone's heard about it, and whoever heard it doesn't forget. My grandmother used to talk about it like someone talking about the truth. It wasn't a story to laugh at, it was advice. She said that if I heard noise on the roof in the middle of the night, and my child started crying dry, without tears, I should cut the air with blessed iron scissors and pray. But I never listened. I thought it was just old folk stuff. Until one night, I heard the most disgusting sound I've ever heard in my life. The strangest thing is that before everything happened, our life was peaceful. I mean, peaceful the way it can be living in the middle of nowhere with well water and only lamplight. I had my little piece of land, some chickens, and my boy had just turned 6 months old. He was strong, healthy, chubby. Everyone said he looked like a little clay doll. He slept well, ate well, almost never cried. Until that month. We lived in a simple house made of adobe with a palm roof and packed earth floor. In his room, I left a sprig of sage tied to the window that my grandmother said would ward off the evil eye and bad things. There was an image of Saint Benedict on the wall, and a white candle I lit every Sunday asking for protection. Nothing too much, just those things you learn from childhood and do automatically without thinking too much about it. But there's a detail. The week everything started, the sage sprig dried up out of nowhere. From one day to the next. I even mentioned it to the neighbor, and she said it was the dry weather. But the truth is, it had rained 2 days before. And the strangest thing, the candle I lit on Sundays started going out by itself. Even with no wind, even with the window glass closed. The really strange thing was my son's crying. Because it wasn't normal crying, you know. It wasn't that little colic cry or hunger or fright. It was a stopped cry. A cry that started suddenly in the middle of the night, always at the same time, and stopped out of nowhere, as if someone had pressed a button. The first night I thought he was just having a nightmare. I picked him up, rocked him, said a Hail Mary, and he slept. But the second night was the same, and the third too. And the strange thing was that he didn't open his eyes. He cried with his eyes closed. And the strangest thing, with his mouth closed too. It was a muffled sound, as if it came from inside him, but without going through his throat. And the worst part, after 3 days like this, he started losing weight. Even nursing properly, even eating the baby food the doctor prescribed. He was getting skinny, with dark circles I'd never seen on a baby. And that's when I remembered my grandmother. I remembered the thread story, but by then it was too late, because that night I saw. The strange thing is that after I started suspecting something was wrong, the house seemed to sense it. Like everything inside got heavier. The air, the silence, even the lamplight seemed weaker, even with a new wick. And the strangest thing, I started hearing a noise on the roof every night. Always at the same time, the baby started crying. It was like something walking on top of the palm leaves, but without making weight. A light, wet sound, like slime dragging slowly. There was one night I left the bedroom door ajar because the heat was too much, and I saw the curtains swaying without any wind. But it wasn't just swaying. It was like something was pulling from behind, slowly, and then letting go, like a hand that changes its mind in the middle of the movement. That same night when I went to pick up the baby, I felt his little nose cold. Very cold, like stone cold. But the rest of his body was warm, sweating. And he didn't open his eyes, didn't wake up, but stopped crying the second I touched him. That's when I decided to sleep on the floor of his room with my grandmother's iron scissors under the pillow. And I prayed for nothing to come down from the ceiling that night. And when the worst happened, I wasn't even sleeping yet. When it happened, I was lying on the floor looking at the ceiling without being able to close my eyes. The baby was already in that muffled cry again, but weaker this time, as if he didn't even have strength anymore. And the noise came back, but not on the roof. It came from inside the room. It was a wet sound, as if something was sliding slowly down the walls. I stayed still, holding the scissors so tight my hand went numb. And then I saw it. I swear on everything I saw it. There was a thread coming down from the crack between the palm leaves on the ceiling. Thin, almost transparent, kind of shiny. It looked like a spider web, but thicker. And it pulsed, as if it had its own life. It came down slowly, very slowly, until it got close to the crib. And then it went straight to my son's face. The strangest thing was that he didn't react. He stopped crying instantly, his face relaxed, like someone in a trance, as if he were being lulled by that thing. I jumped up, hit my head on the corner of the bed, didn't even feel it. I went straight with the scissors to the thread and cut it right away. I heard a dry sound, like meat falling on the floor. The thread came loose and fell next to the crib, making a sound I'll never forget. A sound kind of crackling, kind of wet, as if something alive had fallen. The strangest thing was what I found in the morning, because that night I just thought about protecting my son. I picked him up, left the room, sat in the kitchen until the sun came up. I didn't sleep, didn't even blink. The baby slept in my arms, very quietly, as if he were too tired to feel anything. When dawn broke, I got up the courage and went back to the room, and I saw it. It was there on the floor next to the crib. That thing, it was a tongue, but it wasn't an animal tongue. It was human. Dark, dry, with thin veins on the sides. But the worst part, it was still moving. Slowly, as if it were pulsing, as if it were trying to go back somewhere. Right then, I remembered my grandmother's prayer, the Chinaberry bark fire. And I did exactly as she taught. I threw the tongue in a clay pot, put the bark on top, and lit the fire with a stone match. It smelled horrible in the house. It smelled like burnt bone with snake meat. When it stopped smoking, the room floor got quiet. But then something else started. On the dirt road that passes in the back of the village, a woman started appearing, always in the same place. White dress, hair covering her face, walking crooked with her head dropped too much to one side, as if she had a loose neck, or as if something was missing inside her mouth. And the strangest thing is that since that day, every time this woman passes near a house, a spider appears in some child's room. I'm not talking about a common little spider. I'm talking about big things that appear out of nowhere, even with screens on the windows, even with everything closed. And always in the corner of the ceiling, always looking down. I moved from there soon after. I went to my aunt's house in a town further ahead, and I never went back. But sometimes I dream about the sound of that thing coming down. That wet sound, that strange silence that came after, as if the house were breathing with another mouth. And the strangest thing is that every time I pray before sleeping, I feel a bitter taste in the back of my throat, as if something there still remembered me. Now I ask you, do you know anyone who lives in a remote place and started seeing spiders bigger than they should be in the children's rooms? Someone who hears noise on the roof, but there's no animal up there. If you do, let me know, because there might still be some tongue loose out there. I grew up on a ranch in rural Colorado, a peaceful place right in the middle of nowhere. Those beautiful landscapes you see in postcards, but after a certain hour, you realize the silence weighs heavy. And I was always the type who didn't believe in these things, witchcraft, curses, spirits. For me, it was all grandmother stories. But there's one thing that got stuck in my head to this day. And no matter how much I try to explain it, there's nothing that makes sense. There on the ranch at the back of the property, there was an old well. It was covered with thick boards, crossed and full of rusty nails. My dad always said nobody could mess with it because it wasn't good for anything anymore. But nobody went near it. Not animals, not children. And I grew up hearing about this business. Everyone avoiding the well as if it had a disease. The truth is, I never took it seriously. My brothers even used to say it whispered names at night, and I'd laugh, saying it was the wind, that it was stuff in their heads. It even became a joke among us. Oh, watch out for the well, huh? It might call your name. And we'd laugh like it was the most idiotic thing in the world. But there was one day, one specific day, when the well whispered my name. And I'm here to this day trying to understand how that happened. I remember exactly what day it was. I was coming back from the barn, late afternoon, already getting dark, and I went to get a hose that was always thrown near the fence. The well was nearby, but a little further away, almost at the edge of the woods. I walked by without thinking about anything, but then I heard it. It was like a whisper, really. Very low, as if someone had called my name from inside. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't an echo. It was just my name said in a way that froze me right there. And the worst part, it seemed to come from deep down, as if someone were hidden inside the well. The first thing I thought was that my brother was trying to mess with me. It could only be him. He was the biggest joker, always hiding behind trees, scaring others. I called him right away. I shouted, "Cut it out," but nobody answered. Then I went to the well and stood there just looking at those dark boards full of dirt and rust. And then the name came again. Lower still, as if it were inside my head. The strange thing is that when I went into the house, he was already there. In the kitchen, washing his hands. He hadn't even gone out that late afternoon. I told him about the whisper, and he went white. He stopped scrubbing his hands and said, "Jake, I heard it too." Then my heart raced. After that, we didn't know what to do. I tried to laugh, say it could have been an animal, the sound of wind between the boards, I don't know. But my brother, who always joked about everything, stayed quiet the rest of the night. He didn't even have dinner. He sat in the corner of the kitchen, looking at the floor, as if he were trying to remember something. And the strangest thing is that 2 days later, our neighbor from the ranch next door, Mrs. Henderson, died. And you know whose name the well had spoken before mine that same week? Hers. Who told me this was Miguel, a ranch hand who helped my dad with the cattle. He said that the Monday before, he was passing near the well at night to get the saddle he'd forgotten in the barn, and he swore he heard the voice whispering, "Helen," twice. He even laughed about it, kind of mocking, as if it were just another one of the legends going around. We even joked, "Watch out, Miguel. If you hear your name, start preparing the coffin." But when Helen appeared dead in the chicken coop with her heart failing out of nowhere, with no sign before, I started getting that in my head. It wasn't just coincidence. There was something wrong there. But I still refused to believe it. Even with my brother looking at me strangely, even with the well calling me, I still thought it could be explained. But then he started acting different. My brother had always been one to take those baths, swim in the pond, wash his face in the cold creek in the morning. But after that night, he started avoiding all that. It seemed like a small thing at first, like an excuse here and there. It's too cold today. I have a headache, I'll wash later. Then it got stranger. As the days went by, he stopped drinking water. I swear. He only drank juice, coffee, anything else except water. And if someone offered it, he'd make up a reason, change the subject, or pretend he'd forgotten. I thought he was sick. I even talked to my mom at the time, but she said it must be a teenage phase, right? But I knew it wasn't just that. The strangest thing was one day when he was washing dishes and his hand started shaking when the water hit him. He dropped the plate on the floor, stood looking at his own arm as if he'd been shocked. I asked what happened, and he answered, "Nothing." But you could see he was scared. Not pain, it was fear. And the bizarre thing is that same night I woke up to a noise outside, like a dry crack, wood creaking. I went to the window and saw the well cover kind of crooked, as if someone had messed with it. That gave me one of those chills that starts at the nape of your neck and goes down slowly. Because as far as I knew, nobody had been there in years. The next night, I couldn't even sleep properly. I kept thinking about the well cover out of place, about my brother's reaction with water. Everything seemed wrong, as if something were spinning slowly, and we hadn't noticed the center of the problem yet. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps, very light ones, crossing the living room floor. At first, I thought it was my dad going to the bathroom, But then I realized the front door was being unlocked very slowly. I got up startled and went to the hallway. But I stopped right there because I saw my brother crossing the porch with a glass bottle in his hand. He walked kind of crooked, with his body rigid, as if he were sleepwalking. But his gaze was fixed ahead, without blinking. And the strangest thing was that he went straight to the well. I stood watching from the kitchen window, without courage to go out. It was dark, only the moonlight illuminating his back. And then he knelt next to the well, pulled the cover with one arm as if it weighed nothing, and stayed there still, looking down inside. Then he lifted the bottle and drank. He drank the well water, the same water that nobody had touched in years, that not even animals approached. And I swear on everything that's most sacred, as soon as he drank, I heard that whisper again. But this time it wasn't his name. It was mine. The next day he was strange, more than before. He seemed to have a fever, sweating a lot, walking slowly, but saying he was fine. But there was something on his face kind of faded, as if he weren't completely there anymore. And the strangest thing was that he didn't remember going out of the house. I asked casually, trying not to scare him. I said, "You went out last night, right?" And he stared at me with that distant look and just answered, "I was sleeping." He said he'd had a strange dream, that he dreamed about me, and that in the dream I was falling into a hole. He tried to pull me out, but I kept sinking deeper and deeper. And then he woke up sweating with a taste of rust in his mouth. The strange thing is that after that day, he started getting worse very quickly. He stopped eating, spent hours locked in his room. One night I went in to see how he was, and I saw the sheet soaked, the mattress wet as if he'd come out of a river. And when I got close, his body was cold. Not normal cold, cold like spring water. And the worst part, he looked at me and said, "It's all right now. He just wanted someone." I asked who, but he'd already turned away. 2 days later, my brother died. They found him no longer breathing. My dad tried massage. My mom screamed. I stood still in the corner of the door without being able to move a finger. The doctor from town came, said it looked like respiratory arrest, but there was no explanation for the state of the body. His lungs were full of water, as if he had drowned, but he died sleeping in bed in a dry room. The strangest thing was that same morning, the whole house woke up with the smell of something damp. Not mold or sewage. It was the smell of old water, like from the well. That smell that sticks in your throat and feels like you're swallowing the wrong air. After the burial, I went to the well. I don't know why, maybe just to see with my own eyes. And it was there just like it was. The cover displaced, the nails loose, as if it had been opened again. I stood there for a while listening. I swear I wasn't expecting anything, but I heard my name again. And this time I answered. I said, "I know." I stood there looking into the darkness, trying to understand what that was. If it was just something in my head, if it was trauma, if it was my brother trying to say goodbye. But it didn't seem like a dream, didn't seem like memory. It was a presence, as if the well had chosen. And my brother had gone in my place. After that, I never heard the well call anyone again. The cover stays there the way it was the day we buried my brother. Nobody had the courage to nail it again. My dad just threw some chains over it. My mom tied a rosary to one of the loose nails. And nobody talked about the subject anymore. Not even the day the city came to clean the area. And one of the men, not knowing anything, got too close to the well and got sick the next day. I wanted to say I went back to sleeping peacefully, that I left this behind. But the truth is that to this day, sometimes when the house is silent and you can only hear the sound of wood creaking with the cold, I feel a strange pressure on my neck, a weight as if someone were pressing their ear to mine again. I never drank water straight from the tap again. I never went near that corner of the ranch. And I keep thinking, did he drink the water to protect me, or did that thing just need a name? It didn't matter whose. Sometimes I dream about him, about my brother, but he doesn't speak. He just stands on the other side of the well, looking at me, as if he's waiting for an answer I never know how to give. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe it was a trade. Or maybe the well is just waiting for the next name. If you got this far, I hope you managed to sleep after this. And tell me, would you have the courage to get close to that well? Or is it still whispering names out there? I always found it funny how folks from small towns love their ghost stories. Growing up, I heard my grandmother tell tales of headless horsemen, werewolves, and restless spirits. And I swear I thought it was all just folklore, silly stuff to scare kids and keep city folks away. I'm from northern Nevada, but I moved to Las Vegas a few years back and only returned to the desert when family business calls. What happened to me was back in 2007 during a quick trip. I'd gone to visit my uncle in a tiny town called Searchlight and was heading back on my motorcycle to my mom's place in Laughlin. It was already late, nearly 2 in the morning, but the desert road was familiar, just dirt and gravel that I knew like the back of my hand. The moon was full, casting that eerie glow that only appears on desert back roads. It was actually beautiful scenery, if you're not the type to see ghosts in every Joshua tree shadow. That's when I saw them 5 women, all in black robes with hoods covering their heads, walking single file toward the scrubland. It looked like a funeral procession, but in the middle of the night. I slowed down immediately. I figured maybe it was some evangelical church ritual or even a theater group rehearsing. Who knows? But they didn't seem to want to be seen. The strangest part was that they weren't lost or confused. They walked with purpose, everything in silence, one behind the other, like they knew exactly where they were going. And that's what threw me off. Because if it were drunk people or a group pulling a prank, someone would eventually laugh, stumble, or speak up. But there was nothing, a dry, hard silence. And those clothes, those heavy, thick hoods, as if they were going to a burial, but to a place where the dead hadn't arrived yet. I stopped the bike, didn't turn it off, but took my hand off the throttle and just watched. The road there is surrounded by sagebrush on both sides, kind of enclosed, and they left the shoulder slowly, as if they'd been waiting for that exact moment. They disappeared among the desert plants without hurry. Then one of them stopped. She was the only one who spoke. Her voice was shaky, kind of hoarse, like someone who'd cried too much. She said something I didn't quite understand at first, like, "I don't know if I can do this. I don't want to see it again." Then another one, older, grabbed her arm and spoke back in a dry, firm tone. "It's too late now. Hold steady. Once you see it once, you have to see it through to the end." I swear I thought about shouting, asking if they needed help or something. But my mouth simply wouldn't open. And it wasn't fear, not exactly. In that moment, it was more like when you walk into a room and feel you shouldn't be there. You know that feeling? I can't explain it right. It was just like I was interrupting something, that wasn't meant to be witnessed. The really strange part came after they disappeared into the scrubland. Because as soon as I lost sight of them, I went to start the bike to continue on my way, and it died. Just shut off. The headlight flickered twice, and then nothing. And then I started laughing nervously by myself. I thought, look at this. Now the bike breaks down right in the middle of nowhere, in the early morning hours, after seeing a Gothic desert parade. But then came the smell. That stopped me cold. It was a strong stench, kind of sweet but rotten. You know when you find roadkill that the heat has already bloated. But this smell had something else mixed in, something that reminded me of hot iron, like when electrical wire burns, or when you fry meat directly on metal. I looked back thinking it might be my own bike catching fire, but everything was normal, no smoke, no signs of anything wrong. And the worst part, the sound. It wasn't footsteps, it wasn't an animal running. It was a dragging sound, like when you pull a thick garden hose across dry earth. A scraping that went back and forth slowly, as if something was being pulled into the desert. And it wasn't light. You could feel the weight in the sound. You know how it moved the earth, you could hear the branches giving way. The truth is, right then I stopped laughing. The bike started working again out of nowhere, but the strange thing was that I couldn't leave. The bike was still there, running, headlight on, but it was like my body was glued to the seat. I don't know if it was fear or curiosity, or both together, but something made me stay. And then I saw it. I really saw what they went to do in that scrubland. The five were in a circle in a clearing right there where the brush was thickest. There was a small fire in the middle, but the flames were strange, kind of bluish, almost smokeless. And each of them had something in their hands. One held a bag, another a cloth. One had a kitchen knife, a regular one, but the handle was wrapped in red cloth. And the worst part, one of them held what looked like a small animal, like a piglet or young goat, but it was too still, like it was drugged or already dead. The bizarre thing was the youngest in the group. She was on her knees, trembling as if she were being forced to watch. And the older one, the same one who had spoken to her before, grabbed her chin and turned her face toward the fire. She didn't shout, didn't argue, just said in an icy tone, "Look closely. You saw it once, now you'll see it through to the end." And that's when the woman with the knife bent down toward the animal. I turned my face away immediately, but I heard the sound. It wasn't just cutting. It was like they'd pulled something from inside, like a dry tear, and then the sound of something falling to the ground with a wet thud. The youngest started crying, but no one comforted her. And then came the part that froze me completely. The older woman turned around, looked directly in my direction, and I know there was no way she could see me there in the dark, behind a ridge. But she looked as if she knew, and said without raising her voice, "There's another one with open sight." At that instant, the other four stopped what they were doing. One of them even raised her head slowly, like someone catching the scent of something new. The older woman took a step in my direction, still looking toward the brush. Since you've seen it, there's no turning back now. That's when I managed to move my hand. I started the bike with a jerk and took off accelerating like crazy, with rocks flying, heart pounding in my throat, and the feeling, I swear on everything, that something chased me until I got off that dirt road. The strange thing is that even after all that, I tried to go on with life as if nothing had happened. Like I pretended it was just a weird vision, tired mind stuff, you know. But the truth is that something stayed with me since that night. And I'm not just talking about fear. It's a constant sensation, kind of hidden, as if someone had touched an invisible wire to the back of my mind and left it connected there forever. The next morning, I didn't even want to get out of bed, but a cousin of mine showed up early at the house wanting to borrow some tools. And then, I don't know why, I told him not everything, but I said I'd seen some women in the desert and heard some strange sounds. He opened his eyes wide immediately and said, "Dude, let's go there. I want to see this." We took his bike and went back to that stretch. It was around 9 in the morning. Strong sun, empty road, everything seemed normal until we got close to the entrance to the scrubland. That's where we saw it. In the place where I had stopped the night before, there were 5 deep marks in the ground like footprints, but they weren't from shoes. They looked like bare feet, sunk deep into the damp earth, and beside them, a dragged mark. It wasn't a footprint, not a tire track, not an animal trail. It was like something big, really big, had been pulled into the desert. And the strangest thing is that you could see the earth there was still churned up, as if it had happened just hours before. I didn't say anything, and neither did he. We just stood there staring. My cousin even tried to laugh it off like must have been a sick cow. But even he didn't believe what he said. We turned around without exchanging another word and left. I never told anyone else. My cousin never brought up the subject again. And to this day when he calls, the conversation never goes beyond small talk. Everything okay there? How's the family? It got cold here, you know. As if we'd made a pact of silence without ever agreeing to anything. And I keep pretending I don't remember. But every dawn in the dark, when everything stops making sense for a few seconds, I know they remember too. I don't know if anyone here has ever heard of this, but my grandfather used to say, if you see a rooster with 3 legs before sunrise, it's because there's witchcraft walking in the dark, and it's showing itself to you. I always thought it was just old man nonsense, those stories they tell to scare kids who wake up too early. But what happened to me that dawn was like someone had pulled back a veil from the world and shown me what lies beneath. I was never one to mess with things like witches or witchcraft. I grew up in rural Louisiana, adobe house, wood-burning stove, old radio playing Cajun music low in the late afternoon. The most I ever did was light candles for saints and drink chamomile tea when I felt sick. But that night, it wasn't my stomach that hurt, it was something else. Something that seemed to call me like a whisper coming from inside the earth. I woke up to a sound that shouldn't have been there, and that's when it all began. What made me get out of bed wasn't the sound itself, it was the way it made me feel. It was like something was scratching at the world from the outside, trying to get in. And when I say scratching, I'm not talking about a cat on the roof. It was drier, firmer like thick nails on old wood. And the worst part is that for some reason, it gave me a tightness in my chest that felt like a memory, like when you smell something. And suddenly a memory you didn't know you kept comes flooding back. The house where I was staying is my mother's. It sits at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by swampland on both sides. She's always planted things in the yard, the kind that country folks recognize from far away. Rue, Spanish bayonet, devil's shoestring, purple basil. There's even a rosemary bush that she swore kept bad things away. And look, I always believed more in her faith than in the plant itself. But that night, it seemed like everything was silent. Even the leaves seemed quiet. But there's a detail I'd never noticed before. A little corner near the lemon tree, right at the edge of the fence where the swamp grass always grows thicker, kind of tangled. My grandfather used to say that patch was spirit shadow, that no branch grows right when there's something buried underneath. I never paid attention, but that's exactly where the sound was coming from. And that's when it starts getting really strange. The strangest thing was that when I got close to the window, the smell changed, I swear. Until then it was that humid dawn air, smell of wet earth, you know. But suddenly came a smell that was kind of sweet and nauseating, like melted candle wax mixed with something sour. It wasn't strong, but it seemed to stick to the air. And then when I looked through the crack, I saw it. The creature was a rooster, but it wasn't a normal rooster. It was too big, black as wet charcoal, with feathers that looked burned at the tips. And then I saw it, it had 3 legs. The middle one came out crooked, like it had been broken and poorly reattached, and it dragged it on the ground, making that dry sound I'd heard before. But what really froze me was the way it looked at me, because it wasn't an animal's look. It was the look of someone who knows. It stood still with its head kind of tilted, staring at me as if it knew exactly where I was, as if it had been waiting for me to come out. And I froze there, couldn't even breathe right. And the most bizarre thing was the circle it was standing in. A bunch of burned feathers forming a perfect circle. And in the middle, in the middle, there was a glass bottle. And this part is hard to even write about. The bizarre thing was what was inside the bottle. It was a photo of me, that school picture my mother keeps in a frame near the radio. It was folded, kind of dirty. And you could see my face there, but faded in one part, like blurred from inside the glass. And next to the photo was a tooth, a small baby tooth with a crooked root. Right then I couldn't say how, but deep down I knew which one it was. It was mine, one I lost when I was about 7 years old that fell in the yard and they never found. And the worst part is that when I saw that, I felt something strange inside, like a heat that started at the back of my neck and went down my body, as if my blood had turned into something else. I felt like throwing up, but it wasn't nausea. It was more like a panic trapped in my stomach, a fear that comes without clear reason, but you feel there is a reason, you just can't look it in the face. The rooster kept standing there looking, but now it was taking slow steps around the circle, dragging that middle leg in a way that the sound hit directly on my spine, drag, 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 like it was marking time. And then, in the middle of all this, it stopped again and crowed. But it wasn't a normal crow, it was thicker, drier, like someone trying to imitate a rooster, or like it was coming from inside a body that was never made to crow. And it was at that exact moment that the light bulb in my room exploded. The most bizarre thing was what happened right after the bulb exploded. Everything went dark immediately, but not that common darkness we know. It was a dense blackness, the kind that seems to have weight. But the room didn't go silent. There was a very low sound, like a bee's buzz mixed with whispering, as if someone was talking behind the wall. But you couldn't understand any words. I was frozen there, sitting on the bed, without the courage to get up. But then I felt something cold on my foot. When I looked, I saw there was a black line running under the door, a kind of thick liquid that glowed in the dark, almost like ink, and it moved slowly, as if it was looking for something or someone. The rooster, I didn't see it through the window anymore, but I knew it was still there. I had that strong feeling, like it had gotten inside somehow. And then I heard the crow again, but now it came from inside the room. I swear I didn't see the door open. I just know that suddenly it was ajar, and on the floor, there were footprints. 3 marks in the dust of the floor, as if someone had walked there barefoot, or with 3 feet. But the detail that made me lose my breath was seeing that one of the footprints had the same shape as my foot. Exactly the same, down to the scar on the big toe that I've had since I was a kid. The strange thing is that after that, I don't remember sleeping, but I also don't remember staying awake. It's like I blacked out in a different way, as if I'd been pulled out of time. I only came back when the sun was already hitting the corner of the window. The house was the same way, but there was something wrong in the air, a kind of forced silence, you know. Like everything was trying to seem too normal. The first thing I did was run outside. The circle of feathers was still there, the bottle too, but the photo had disappeared, and so had the tooth. I went back inside trembling, not knowing what to do. I called a root doctor my mother had known since I was little Miss Evangeline. When I explained more or less what I'd seen, she went quiet. Then she said, "There's only one thing, I'm not going in there. What you saw isn't just witchcraft, it's live work." And she hung up. Since that day, nothing's been right. I lost my job 3 weeks later, out of nowhere, no reason. My sister started having fevers that come and go without explanation. And the worst part is that every night, around 3 in the morning, I hear a rooster crow. Doesn't matter where I am, even if I'm not at home, even if there's no animal around. The crow comes from inside my head, the same way as that night. The truth is that from then on, I stopped trying to understand, because the more I look, the more it seems like I'm pulling bad things to me. As if that rooster had come not just to show the witchcraft, but to remind me that it was done, and that a part of it is now mine. Before anything else, let me tell you that I'm not one of those people who sees signs in everything or blames spirits when a light bulb burns out. I'm the type who trusts logic more than prayer. I've always been like that. I was born and raised in rural Alabama, where anything out of the ordinary is immediately blamed on spirits, curses, or the evil eye. I never listened. I always thought those stories were just the way people explain what they don't understand. And that's exactly why I'm here, kind of not knowing how to start, because honestly, to this day, I can't properly understand what happened to my daughter. It's strange to tell this. I don't like seeming like that parent who went into paranoia, you know. But there are things you can't brush off with simple explanations. The most bizarre thing is that it all started in the most trivial way. My daughter saying that a hairy lady sat on the edge of her bed. But she was 5 years old, and kids say the darndest things. So of course, the first thing that went through my head was imagination. But there's a detail that bothers me to this day. She was never afraid. She just told it like someone talking about any visitor. But I only started getting suspicious when her hair began appearing with strange knots, as if someone had tried to braid it while she was sleeping. And the strangest thing was every day, always on the right side of her head, always the same pattern, as if it were done in a hurry or with anger. We lived in a pretty simple place, you know. Wooden house, the kind that creaks when you walk down the hallway. Everything was old, kind of crooked, but nothing that made me think of haunting. It was just old. And the routine was peaceful. I worked at a garage nearby. My wife stayed home with the little one, and we got by the way we could. But every time my daughter slept in her room, the next day there was that tangled hair again. And the strangest thing was realizing that this didn't happen when she slept elsewhere. There was one weekend when she went to my mother-in-law's house and came back with her hair perfectly smooth, no knots. Nothing. I even joked at the time. I said Grandma must sleep combing the girl's hair. But after she came back home, things got worse. On the first night back, my wife woke up to a noise in the girl's room like wood creaking very slowly, as if someone had sat on the bed carefully. And then came that little chill down the spine. You know why? Because when she went into the room, the girl was sleeping, but seemed uncomfortable, moving her head to the side as if something was pulling her hair. But there's a detail that made me freeze. When she turned on the light, the pillow was on the floor, and right where it had been was a mark, like a round, dark stain, as if something wet had been there for a long time. But there was no smell, no explanation. We thought about mold, maybe sweat, something like that. We tried to go on with life until the day I found that braid. Man, I swear, to this day I try to understand what I saw. I was leaving for work early and went to her room just to see if she was still sleeping. The sunlight was coming in sideways through the window, that quiet morning atmosphere, you know. Everything seemed normal until I looked at the foot of the bed. On the wooden post, that thick one at the foot, there was a braid. A well-made black braid, but too tight and wet. That's what made me step back. The hair was soaked, and the smell wasn't sweat or hair product. It was a smell of earth, wet earth, like clay mud, like that smell that comes when you dig a deep hole. Right then my mind went straight to my daughter, but she was still sleeping with her hair loose, all messy on the side, and it even seemed shorter. That's when a discomfort hit me, because rationally it didn't make sense. Who would have done that? The door was locked, the window closed from the inside, and no one else had entered that room since the night before. I still tried to think of some prank by my wife, or I don't know. Maybe my daughter had learned to braid and had done it before sleeping, even without remembering. But it didn't fit. That braid was thick, it wasn't her hair. It looked like adult hair, darker, heavier hair. And the worst part, you couldn't untie it easily. It was tied tight to the wood, as if it had been done with anger or in a hurry. I took it to old Mrs. Patterson's place. She's an old root worker in the area, one of those we grew up hearing about. Even though I didn't believe in those things, I thought it was better to take it. Just in case, you know, better safe than sorry. And also I didn't know what else to do, so I went. She looked at the braid without even touching it. Right away, she made a face like disgust mixed with fear, told me to put it on a clay plate, and covered it with salt and sage. I stood there, kind of not knowing whether to take it seriously or apologize for wasting her time. But when she lit the match, the fire caught with a snap, as if there was alcohol in it. Thick, kind of green smoke went up with such a strong smell that it burned my eyes. And the worst part, the braid took a long time to burn, as if it were made of something else. It seemed to resist. When it was over, she just said, "This hair ain't from the living." Then I froze. I asked what she meant by that, but she just told me to throw the plate in a river and not bring anything like that again. She said to put a glass of water under my daughter's bed and pray Psalm 91 every night. I went home feeling ridiculous. I thought I was overreacting, that it was all psychological. But the next day, early in the morning, when I went into my daughter's room, the braid was there, but now braided around her neck. Man, that froze me inside. My daughter was lying on her side, eyes closed, breathing very slowly, and the braid, thick, black, wet, wrapped around her neck like it had been made right there while she slept. It wasn't a strand, it wasn't a tangle. It was a complete braid, tied like a necklace, but made of hair. I tried to untie it right away, but it seemed stuck with glue. And when I pulled gently, she made a strange sound like a low moan, as if she'd felt it. So I stopped. My wife came running, almost fell on the floor in desperation, tried to wake the girl, and nothing. She shook her, shouted, and she stayed there, frozen, like she was in a trance. The room was cold, but not that air conditioning or open window cold. It was a still, dry cold, as if the air had been drained. And the smell, I can't describe it. It was a smell of old things, things that shouldn't be there, like someone had dug something up in the middle of the house. A smell that people aren't supposed to smell inside a child's room. When she finally opened her eyes, it was like she'd come back from a distant place. She didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't react, just looked. And then she smiled a corner smile, kind of crooked, kind of empty, and stayed like that. She didn't answer any questions, not my name, not anything. Just smiled. And since that day, she doesn't speak anymore. After that day, we didn't stay even one more week there. My wife was crying every night. I couldn't sleep anymore, and my daughter, well, she continued that way. Silent, with that corner smile that showed neither joy nor sadness. It seemed just like a disguise, as if something inside was hidden behind that child's face. I changed the bed, burned the mattress, even had them remove the window from the room. I thought there might be something in the wood, I don't know, a nest, a bug, some explanation. But there was nothing. We moved. New city, new house, everything new. But the problem came with us. On the first morning in the new house, I went into her room, and there it was, a new braid in the corner of the room. Same type of hair, same tight knot. And the most bizarre thing, my daughter's hair was visibly shorter, as if someone had cut it during the night. But there was no sign of cutting, no scissors, nothing. It was like it had simply disappeared. Since then, every morning it's the same thing. Every single one. A different braid, always in some corner of the room. I've found them under the bed, inside the drawer, even behind the pillow. And she continues without speaking, just smiles. And the worst part is that always at 6 in the evening, what my mother used to call reverse noon, the bed creaks slowly, as if someone still sits there. This happened just over a year ago, and to this day, I'm not sure if it was real, if it was some kind of breakdown, or if something has been following me since that day. I never had much contact with spiritual things or religion. I've always been more skeptical, you know. But there are things you can't explain, no matter how hard you try. I don't usually post anything on forums or tell this to many people. But lately, I've been dreaming about that tree again. The same trail, the same smell, everything exactly the same. And I wake up with my mother's voice calling me. The same voice from when she used to call me for dinner. But she died 3 years ago. I know it sounds like it's all in my head, but I'll tell you what happened, and you can draw your own conclusions. What maybe makes everything even stranger is that I almost didn't go to the trail that day. I wasn't even going to go. I'd slept badly, had a stiff neck, and almost gave up. But I ended up going to clear my head, as my grandmother used to say. It was a trail I knew well, in the back of an abandoned ranch near where I grew up in rural Montana. I used to go there a lot when I was younger. A place of thick forest, strong smell of wet earth, those tall trees that make shade even in the midday sun. The path was the same as always, but with one difference. It seemed more stifling, like the air wasn't circulating right. I know it's hard to explain, but it wasn't just heat. It felt like the air there was heavy, as if the forest was watching you pass. And there was something on the ground that I swear I'd never seen before. Sage branches scattered around, some dry, others still kind of green. I figured someone must have left them to keep snakes away or something like that. But then I got to the foot of that tree, and everything changed. The strangest thing is that tree wasn't just any tree. I'd passed by it dozens of times, but that day it seemed different, drier, darker. I don't know. It looked like someone had painted it with soot. And right at the base, on the ground, there was a circle of ash. Real ash, like from a fire. But the ground there was damp, kind of muddy. That shouldn't have been there. Inside the circle were some scratches, some symbols drawn carefully, looking like something from an old map or old book, you know. And right in the center was something I'd never seen before. It looked like a small seal made with braided rope, some dirty feathers, and a bunch of black melted wax. I stood there staring at it like it was some kind of trap. I tried to convince myself it was some religion's ritual or kid's prank, but there was something wrong there. And the worst part is that without realizing it, I stepped in the middle. I don't know if I slipped, if I tripped, or if I was pulled. I just know that the moment my foot touched that wax, I got such strong nausea that I almost threw up right there. Hours after stepping on that thing, I just felt that strong nausea and dizziness that lasted a good few minutes. I sat on a rock, drank water, tried to breathe deeply. I thought it was just the heat or some bad smell from the wax. I don't know. But when I got back home, things started getting strange in a way I'd never experienced. On the first night, I woke up with a smell of something burned, but it wasn't normal burning. It was like sulfur mixed with burned hair, a smell that stuck in your nose and seemed to come from the corners of the house, as if something was hidden there, watching. And the most bizarre thing, I heard my mother calling me from the room with her exact voice, the same intonation, everything exactly the same. She died in 2021, suddenly, out of nowhere. And since then, I'd never dreamed of her, never felt anything. But there it seemed like she was alive and calling me. And the strange thing is that instead of running or turning on the light, I stayed still with a bad feeling in my chest, like it was fear mixed with shame, as if I'd done something wrong without knowing it. And the worst part, that was just the beginning. The strange thing was when things started moving with no one around. Like I'd leave my backpack in one corner and find it in another. Doors I was sure I'd closed would be open in the morning. And the worst part is that none of this was noisy. Everything was silent, as if someone was there being careful not to be noticed, but leaving clues, you know. Then there was a night I woke up to a very specific sound. It was my mother calling me again, but this time it wasn't just the voice. I heard the floor creaking, like someone walking slowly down the hallway. And that's when I was sure something was wrong, because my house is small. And that sound was coming from her room, which has been closed since she passed. I swear on everything holy. I got up, went there with my phone's flashlight, trembling, and when I put my hand on the doorknob, I heard her voice right next to the door, as if she was whispering directly in my ear from inside the room. You shouldn't have touched the seal. But there's a detail. My mother never knew I went on that trail, never knew about the seal, never even talked about it with anyone. And the most bizarre thing was what came next. I know I should have backed away, gone back to my room, and pretended none of it was happening. But something was pulling me to open that door. It was like I was hypnotized. And when I pushed it, my phone's light went out of nowhere. I was in total darkness for about 3 seconds, and when it came back on, I swear my mother was there inside, sitting on the edge of the bed, back to me, with her hair kind of messy, wearing that light blue nightgown she liked. And there was a black candle lit on the floor, right in front of her, dripping wax into a little metal bowl. The same black wax I'd seen on the trail. She was murmuring some words that weren't English or any real language. It was like she was pulling something from inside her throat in a strange rhythm, kind of sung, kind of painful. And the worst part was when she turned her face just a little bit, just enough for me to see that her eye was completely white. No iris, no pupil, like it had been turned inside out. She whispered one more phrase very softly, as if it wasn't even for me. If he heard it, now he'll have to see it too. And at that instant, everything went dark again. But not like when the light goes out. It was like the entire air in the room became heavy, dense, suffocating. I fainted right there at the door. When I woke up, it was already day. I was lying on the living room floor with my neck aching and sunlight coming through the window. My mother's room door was closed, as if no one had entered there, as if nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't a dream. The candle had left a circle of black wax marked on the floor, and the little metal bowl was there too, but now empty. From that day on, my life became something else. I started losing weight without explanation, like 5 pounds in 1 week, then more. I had tests done, went to doctors, tried to eat more, nothing helped. The strangest thing is that I felt hungry, but it was like the food didn't stay, as if something was consuming me from the inside. The sulfur smell came back stronger in the corners of the house, especially in the bathroom and laundry room. Smell of dead things mixed with burned candle. And the worst part, I kept hearing my mother's voice, but now she wasn't calling me. She whispered things I didn't understand. Sometimes it sounded like crying, other times it sounded like she was laughing. And the most bizarre thing, every time I tried to talk about it with someone, something strange happened. A glass would fall, a light bulb would burn out, or the person would change the subject out of nowhere, as if they'd forgotten what I was saying. It sounds silly, but I feel like something has been stuck to me since that day. And every night, around 3 a.m, I hear footsteps in my mother's room. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone pacing back and forth. I've tried moving, tried staying at friends' houses, but the sounds follow me. The smell follows me. And sometimes, when I'm almost asleep, I hear her voice again, whispering my name in that same tone she used when I was a kid. But now it doesn't sound loving. It sounds hungry. I don't know what that seal was or who put it there. I don't know why stepping on it connected me to whatever was in that circle. All I know is that my mother or whatever is wearing her voice isn't resting, and neither am I. Sometimes I think about going back to that tree, finding that circle, trying to undo whatever I did. But I'm scared that going back might make things worse, that I might complete whatever ritual I accidentally started. Because deep down, I know that seal wasn't just marking something. It was keeping something contained. And when I stepped on it, when I broke it with my weight and my disbelief, I let something out. Something that's been with me ever since, wearing my mother's face, speaking with her voice, but hungry for something I don't understand. And every morning when I wake up, there's a little more black wax on my windowsill. A little more of that sulfur smell in my clothes. A little less of me left behind. I'm not the same person who walked that trail over a year ago. And I'm starting to think that whoever I was before is never coming back. Between my 6th and 11th birthday, my family and I lived in a rough neighborhood in Detroit. One night, it was just my mother, my 2 siblings, and me at home. My father worked as a long-haul trucker, which meant he was often on the road for weeks at a time, leaving our mother to handle everything alone. That evening, around midnight, someone suddenly rang our apartment building's buzzer. My mother woke up and went to the intercom to ask who was there, but no answer came. She figured it might be some kids playing pranks or pulling some other stupid nonsense, so she wasn't scared, just annoyed. She went back to bed, but about 30 minutes later, the buzzing started again. My mother got up once more and looked out the side window to see if she could spot anyone outside, but she couldn't see a soul. That's when fear crept in. She went back to the bedroom, grabbed my father's revolver, sat in the dark living room, and just waited to see if someone would try to break in. After what felt like an eternity, the buzzer rang again. This time, she spoke calmly into the intercom, explaining that she would call the police if the harassment continued, and that she would shoot if anyone tried to break in. Again, no response. She went to the window one more time, and this time she saw them, 3 men standing there with covered faces. All 3 were staring directly up at our window, directly at her. My mother said she immediately ran to call the police while my 2 siblings and I slept soundly in our bedroom. No one tried to break in directly, but my mother had to wait almost an hour before the police finally arrived. When they came, they rang the front door buzzer, which sent my mother into another panic because she thought the masked men had returned. Thankfully, it really was the police. She let the officers in, and they took a quick look around the entrance area and around the building to make sure no one was still lurking. After the search, they told my mother they had found a piece of barbed wire, about 4 feet long, right next to the front door. They asked if it belonged to her. My mother said no, of course, and asked why they wanted to know. The officer said it was possible that the wire belonged to the men who had been buzzing. My mother then asked if the men had planned to use it, and the police said they couldn't say for certain. But to this day, she's convinced they intended to torture us. What the police could say for certain was that it was very smart of her not to open the door. Doing so might have cost her life. They also said they would patrol the neighborhood until morning and conduct a thorough investigation at daylight. Later that morning, we kids were already at school. The police called again to speak with my mother. They explained that during their search, they had found traces in the yard. Footprints that led around the house all the way to my bedroom window. Our apartment was on the 2nd floor, so it would have been frighteningly easy to reach if someone had a sufficiently long ladder. They also found scratch marks on the windowsill where someone had obviously tried to pry open the window but had failed. My mother had always suspected that one of our neighbors had something to do with it because every time she ran into him, he stared at her in an extremely creepy way. He also knew exactly when my father wasn't home because he knew which vehicle he drove. For my mother, that was the final trigger. When my father finally came home, she gave him a very clear ultimatum. Either he finds us a new apartment immediately, or she would leave him and take us kids with her. And so we actually moved within 6 months. I celebrated my 12th birthday in a place where my mother felt safe for the first time again, in a neighborhood where she no longer felt like she had to sleep with one eye open. This story is about my current upstairs neighbor in my apartment building in Portland. He disappears for weeks at a time, and then suddenly, on a weeknight around 11 p.m., you hear sounds that remind you of a slaughterhouse. That's when you know he's back. A lot has happened, but there are 2 incidents that sum up everything you need to know about this creepy guy. One day, I was carrying my groceries up from the car, and he offered to help. I thanked him and assumed that, like our other neighbor had done before, he would simply carry the bags up to the 2nd floor landing and set them down there before continuing to his apartment. Instead, he followed me back to the car and stood about 2 feet behind me, while I leaned into the trunk to get the last 2 bags. He took all the bags from my hands and went up the stairs while I was still saying, "Oh, thanks, that really wasn't necessary." I unlocked my door, and that's when he said, "No problem. I know your husband leaves early for work, so you're home alone then." I had the door open just enough to go into the apartment, and before I could turn around, he was already inside. He opened my refrigerator, put the milk in, and began looking around the apartment. He even glanced into the bedroom. For context, the reason I didn't completely freak out or scream in that moment was that it was 8 in the morning, and the other 2 residents of the building weren't home. No one would have heard me. He's probably around 6'2", I thought to myself. I'm 5'5" in solid shoes. I just said, "Okay, thanks for the help. See you around." But he kept rummaging through the refrigerator and looked toward my bed again. Then he turned around and slowly walked toward me until he noticed that I had a very large butcher knife only about 4 inches from my hand. He decided to leave the apartment then. I called my husband, crying. He was an hour away at work, and I told him what had happened. That same evening, my husband wanted to confront him, but he wouldn't open the door. The next day, my husband went up again, and the neighbor broke down in tears, said he didn't remember anything, and that he was sorry. He just wanted to be especially neighborly. My husband just told him, "My wife is a strong woman. She can carry her groceries up by herself." Sometime later, we woke up in the middle of the night because someone was screaming outside. When we looked out the living room window, we saw our creepy neighbor with blood streaming down his face. He could barely stand and was screaming at the police officers, "I'm not going to the damn hospital." Apparently, he had gotten into a fight with 4 or 5 other guys at the pool hall down the street and had gotten beaten pretty badly. Eventually, the police were able to get him under control and drove him to the hospital in handcuffs. The next morning, I drove alone to go shopping. My husband had the day off. When I came home, The neighbor was standing outside smoking a cigarette. You could tell he wasn't quite sober yet from whatever had happened the night before. He came directly to the car as if he was waiting for me to get out. He stood by the trunk. That was the first time I'd seen him again since the incident in my apartment, and maybe he thought my husband wasn't home. I immediately called my husband, and when the neighbor noticed I was on the phone and heard my husband coming down the stairs, he ran around the corner as fast as he could. My husband and I drove to the store that same day and bought me a gun. Since then, when I'm alone, he just stares at me. When my husband is with me, he acts like we don't exist. I know this might sound like the whining of some paranoid woman complaining about her antisocial neighbor, but sometimes I'm genuinely afraid to be here when my husband isn't home. And since writing this story makes me feel a little less alone, it was probably worth it. This happened a few years ago, but to this day, I feel almost sick when I think back to that night. I was in my early 20s and living in a really cheap, run-down apartment complex in Albuquerque that was known for being extremely sketchy. There was this neighbor who constantly played James Brown and Motown music, and although he seemed kind of weird, I thought to myself, how bad can he be if he just chills to old-school music? I often heard him playing loud music or talking loudly. But since we both had tiny studio apartments that were wall-to-wall, I just turned up my own music to not hear him so clearly. One night he had apparently been drinking heavily, and his girlfriend was visiting. You could hear him getting aggressive, but it didn't seem like anything unusual. That's just how he was sometimes. It wasn't particularly late yet, so I went out with some friends. My boyfriend stayed home. I came back around 1 in the morning. As we drove into the parking lot, we saw my neighbor standing outside between the cars, somehow acting strange. Okay, weird, but this guy was always kind of creepy anyway. My friends found it much stranger than I did. I didn't think much of it, and had them drop me off right at the entrance because it was easier for them. But the moment they drove away and I walked toward my apartment, I had to pass by him, and my heart sank. He stood completely motionless, his body mostly hidden by a bush that stood between our apartments, like in that funny Simpsons meme, except this was absolutely not funny. As I got closer, it seemed like he thought I hadn't noticed him because it was so dark outside. He stood there like a statue. I raised my hand in greeting and mumbled, "Hi," just to show him. "I see you. I'm not going to pretend I don't see you. Just don't try anything." No one was outside at that weekday hour. No one would have heard me. After I spoke to him, he stepped out of the shadow of the bush into the weak light of the porch. Never in my life have I seen such eyes. My heart races as I write this. They were wide open, dark, completely dilated like a wild animal insane. He didn't say a word, but his gaze went right through me. I immediately ran to my apartment. My boyfriend was tired and half asleep, but he mentioned that the neighbor's music had been loud. He had also heard a lot of noise and arguments, but hadn't thought anything of it. All night long, we heard dull noises. It sounded like furniture being moved. It scared me to know that he had been in exactly that state, animalistic, cold, unpredictable. The next morning, I heard the police knocking on his door outside. At first, I was relieved, but at the same time horrified. Why were they there? Shortly after, he was led away in handcuffs after the officers had loudly demanded that he let them in. They asked me when I had last seen or spoken with him. I told them about the night, the argument, the noises, the frightening encounter, and the sounds during the night. What I learned the next day will forever turn my stomach. A maintenance worker told me the details. I'll only give a simplified version here because they were horrific. The James Brown-playing neighbor had brutally murdered his girlfriend that night. He dismembered parts of her body and dragged the rest to the railroad tracks that ran directly behind our apartment complex. It suddenly became clear to me that cold, wide stare I had seen in his eyes was the look of someone who had just taken another person's life in the most gruesome way. I was so sad for this woman. She didn't deserve it. She was always quiet, friendly, and often seemed worn down by life when I encountered her. She sometimes asked for a cigarette. To this day, I feel sick thinking about how narrowly I escaped death. Literally, he could have attacked me in his madness just the same. He was simply standing in the dark, waiting when I came home. To everyone who knows this feeling, trust your gut. When someone seems off to you, even if they seem harmless, keep your distance. Stay far away. I moved to a different apartment right after the incident. I couldn't bear to stay in that place. The neighbor went to prison. I later saw his police photo. It was terrible to see him again. I just hope he stays where he belongs. A few houses down the street from where I grew up in Tucson lived an older man with his wife and dog in a large, single-family house. He was more of a loner, as they say, and I never saw him talk to anyone. The only reason you ever saw him in front of the house was when he walked his dog. We lived peacefully on the same street for a long time, and although he seemed very antisocial, everything seemed fine. But one day, things went downhill. Eventually, people noticed that his wife's car was no longer in the driveway, and it was later confirmed that she had left him and moved out of town. This only came out by chance, because a former colleague of the woman happened to run into a neighbor. So it took 2 weeks before the neighborhood even realized she was gone for good. We felt sorry for him, but marriages breaking up is just part of life, and since he behaved the same as always, there was initially no reason for concern. One morning, somewhat later, I left the house as usual to catch my school bus. Our street is actually quite quiet. Normally, hardly anything happens there. But on this particular morning, everything looked completely different. A few neighbors were standing outside, and my parents said there was something strange going on with the old man at the end of the street. But no one knew the details. Everyone seemed very worried because apparently he had gotten into an argument with someone while walking his dog, and just the fact that he was talking to someone at all was shocking. And then he started screaming, loud and angry. You can imagine, a man who hasn't exchanged a word with anyone for years suddenly starts raging in the middle of the street. That was naturally a huge spectacle. I wanted to stop and watch what was happening, but my mother and father insisted that I hurry and not be late for school, so I left. All day long, I kept thinking about the scene. I wasn't obsessed with it, but I was curious. I wondered if he had maybe been arrested or taken away, or if there had been other incidents. I was almost looking forward to hearing from my parents what had happened, but today, I'm deeply ashamed of that feeling, because what I experienced when I returned was anything but entertaining. When I arrived by bus and got off, I saw that the entire street was blocked off and evacuated. Police cars and officers were everywhere. Even a SWAT team was on site. I had no idea what was going on, so I ran home and met my parents. They explained to me that the old man had tried to destroy the entire street in a manic episode. He had flooded his entire basement with gasoline and hidden an improvised bomb in his garden shed. Basically, a large pile of propane gas bottles connected together. A clock and a toaster served as a timer for both the bomb and the basement. Everything was set to explode between 7 and 8 in the morning. He had even placed a smaller version of the explosive device in the neighbor's trash can right next door. Before the old man tried to detonate the bomb, he devastated the entire interior of his house. He smashed everything to pieces: furniture, windows, walls. Then he went to the garage and continued his destructive rampage there. And that's exactly what became his downfall. A neighbor heard the noise, became suspicious, and looked through the garage window. The gasoline smell was so strong that he immediately noticed the danger. He broke down the door, entered the house, and saw the complete chaos the man had caused. And that was the moment when the so-called argument took place that everyone had heard that morning. After the screaming stopped, the neighbor immediately called the police. Meanwhile, people waited outside, exactly at the moment my parents sent me to school and reminded me not to dawdle. Our neighbor in the house was trying to activate the explosives and blow us all up. The city police special unit later said it was a miracle that the explosive device hadn't detonated. The construction was quite sophisticated. Only the timer and detonator were faulty. If the neighbor had been a little more careful in making these two elements, I wouldn't be sitting here today telling you this story. The police arrived shortly after my departure, gained access to the house, and arrested the man before he could correct his mistakes and detonate the explosive. At first, we thought we'd have to stay in a hotel overnight, but the bomb squad was able to disarm the device about an hour after my return from school. After that, we were allowed back into our houses. I later heard that after his arrest, the man was declared unfit to stand trial and was sent directly from the courtroom to a psychiatric clinic. He's remained there ever since, and from what I hear, he'll probably never be released because his mental condition hasn't improved. He's said to still carry a deep hatred for the world within him. When I was in 5th grade, a new family moved into the trailer near our house in rural Texas. My grandfather was the owner and rented it to them. Since they had 2 kids who were about the same age as my brother and me, we were both really excited to meet them. There was Jessica, who was my age, and her little brother Jake, who was 9, just like my brother. At first, they seemed okay. Jessica was friendly and we got along well. Jake, however, was a completely different story, but I'll get to that. Their father was a very strange guy. He bought old furniture, chairs, tables, whatever he could get, and stacked them with trash in the backyard, only to then set everything on fire. This happened so often that eventually I didn't even notice the smell of smoke anymore. When they finally moved out, they left behind a pile of charred garbage, blackened wood, and twisted metal frames. The trailer was also a complete mess, with oil stains smeared across floors and walls. Once, I went inside looking for Jessica. Her father was there, shirtless, sitting in a stained armchair with a beer in his hand. He just looked up at me, his gaze hard and cold, and I froze. I didn't say a word, just turned around, walked out, and never returned there again. Before things got out of hand, the four of us, Jessica, Jake, my brother, and I, spent a lot of time together and often rode bikes together. Jessica was nice, and you could talk to her well. When we raced along the dusty path behind the trailer, kicking up dust and laughing when one of us almost crashed, Jake was there too. But as I said, he was completely different from his sister. Jake often showed up half naked at our place, without a shirt, sometimes even without shoes, with snot on his face that he wiped off with his arm as if he didn't care at all. My mother caught him several times peeing in her flower beds. She yelled at him, but he just grinned and ran away. Once he grabbed the streamers on my bike handlebars while I was riding and pulled so hard that I almost crashed. I was angry, but we still let him continue playing with us. He was Jessica's brother, after all, and she was our friend. But then came the thing with the bow. I didn't even know Jake had one until he showed up at our front door with it one day. It wasn't a toy and didn't look like one at all. His father actually hunted deer with it. Apparently, he had shown Jake how to use it, and that's probably how Jake figured out where it was kept. We were outside in the yard, fooling around, when Jake suddenly drew the string and aimed the arrow directly at my brother's head. The arrow was knocked, the tip sharp enough to kill. My little brother didn't move, he just stood there, eyes wide open. I screamed at Jake to stop, and he laughed as if it were a game. He didn't shoot, but he didn't lower the bow immediately either. My mother ran outside, saw what was happening, and completely lost it. She grabbed my brother and me and pulled us into the house. Then she told us we weren't allowed to play with them anymore. Jessica and Jake still came by afterward, knocked on the door, called our names, and we just sat inside, completely quiet, waiting for them to leave. Jessica asked why we wouldn't come out anymore, her voice sounding small and confused. Jake knocked harder and yelled some nonsense. It made us both cry, and this went on for weeks until they finally stopped. Years later, I suddenly thought of Jessica and Jake. The trailer had been gone for a long time. My grandfather had it towed away after they left the mess. But I couldn't get rid of the memory of the pile of burned furniture, their father's empty stare, and Jake's eyes when he aimed the drawn bow at my little brother. I wondered what it must have been like for Jessica and Jake to live in that home. Their parents didn't seem to care much. Jake was definitely wild, but maybe he never had a chance to be anything else. No one wiped his nose or told him not to pee in flowers. Jessica was different, but she was stuck in the same situation. While I was thinking about this, I remembered how one night I woke up to a noise at my window. It was late. The house was dark and quiet. I pulled aside the curtain of my bedroom window and saw someone standing by the trees, someone too small to be an adult. I blinked and thought I recognized Jake's messy hair and thin figure. He was just standing there, staring at the house, and then he was gone. Maybe it was a dream or I imagined it. But that night, I locked my windows, and it took a long time before I could fall asleep again. When I think back to everything today, I feel somewhat sorry for both of them. Jessica was a good friend, and Jake, as much as he seemed like a psychopath, was obviously a neglected child without good parents. The father scared me, and I barely remember the mother. I don't know where they went after they moved out, but back then, I only knew one thing: the fear of the arrow, the fading of their knocking sounds, and the eerie silence that settled over our house when they finally disappeared. I was 8 years old, my father was robbed at gunpoint by our neighbor. It happened on a Tuesday evening in late October. My father had just come home from work and was unloading groceries from the car. I was inside watching TV when I heard a loud bang. At first, I thought it was just the screen door slamming shut, but then I heard my father yelling. I ran to the window and saw a man pointing a gun directly at my father's chest, and I immediately recognized that it was our neighbor who lived 3 houses down. He took my father's wallet and car keys and then ran into the woods behind our house. My father stumbled back into the house, pale and shaking, and called the police. The police caught our neighbor that same night. They found him hiding in a shed about a mile away with the gun and my father's stolen items still on him. He had been drinking and needed money for more alcohol. At least that's what the police officers told us. He went to prison for armed robbery, and for a while, everything felt safer. I didn't have to see his rusty pickup truck down on the street anymore. I didn't hear his dog barking for no reason at night anymore, but I found no peace. The memory of that night wouldn't let me go. I kept seeing that gun in front of me, how it gleamed in the porch light. I saw how my father's hands trembled when he raised them in the air. 5 years later, I was now 13. The neighbor was released from prison. I found out when I came home from the school bus one afternoon and saw the exact same rusty pickup truck in his driveway. I remember how my stomach cramped, how I ran to the front door and told my father about it. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the newspaper. When I told him, he seemed tired but not surprised. He said the neighbor had served his sentence and had every right to return to his house. But I didn't care about his rights at all. All I could think about was that gun and how close it had been to him pulling the trigger and taking away my only remaining living parent. My mother had died when I was still a baby from a rare form of cancer. On the first night after his return, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house made me jump. I constantly checked the locks on the windows. My father noticed how tense I was and tried to calm me down. He said our neighbor wasn't stupid, not stupid enough to try something like that again. Not with the police now keeping an eye on him. He also added that people could change, and we had to give him a chance. I nodded, but I didn't believe him. All I saw was his crazed look, and how he waved that gun around as if he had already decided to kill my father. The nightmares started shortly after. I dreamed of him breaking into our house with the gun in his hand. Only this time, my father wasn't there to protect me. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing, and lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling until the first daylight came through my window. This went on for weeks, then months. I'm pretty sure it damaged my health. I stopped riding my bike past his house, taking the long way around the block just to avoid seeing it. I hated being so afraid, and there was nothing I could do about it. The neighbor stayed in that house for 2 more years. I suggested to my father that we should move, but he said we couldn't afford it. I don't know what the neighbor did all day, probably nothing, because his truck barely moved. But then, in the spring when I was 15, I noticed a for sale sign in his front yard. A few weeks later, the truck was gone. The house stood empty. It felt like a small miracle, as if God had answered one of my many, many prayers. My father said he'd heard the man had moved to another state, maybe to relatives, and I didn't care where he went as long as he was gone. The nightmares didn't stop immediately, but they became less frequent, and eventually I could walk past that house without my chest tightening or my legs telling me to run. The house is still there at the end of the street, but it doesn't feel like his house anymore. What really bothers me, though, even though he's no longer part of our lives, is that there's a small part of this memory that he will forever occupy. And sometimes, I wish for nothing more than to simply be able to forget everything. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.